The original intent of the class was to try to be done close to the end of June. We may do it close, not totally. I don't know how far we're going to get through tonight. The idea is to learn, not to speed through it. So don't hesitate with your comments and especially your questions on anything. Don't want anybody to walk away with something not clear. The last time, which was a couple weeks ago, we went through the end of chapter 22 and into chapter 23. We have Paul, who has finished his missionary journeys. He has been warned, you are going to be bound. Afflictions await you. Still goes to Jerusalem. He goes to the temple. He does Jewish things. He is trying to dispel the rumors, the slander that these Jews have been putting on him that have been in the Gentile world, that he is attacking Moses, he's attacking the law, he is disrespectful to everything good, is a basic idea. And he's trying to dispel that, and they think, did he take that Gentile in there? Because we saw him with that guy the other day. It puts him over the edge. They grab him. They're about to tear him apart when the Romans come in and take him away. He questions. He ends up talking to the people. He tells them of his conversion. What changed his mind? I was like you. It comes back to a point where whenever he starts talking about how he went to the Gentiles, that pushed him over the edge again. So the Romans took him in. And the Romans were going, well, we can't get it from them. We'll beat it out of him. So after they tie him up, they find out he's a Roman citizen. And it was, now we're in trouble. We tied up a Roman citizen. It's against the law. They hadn't questioned him first. They assumed he was a Jew only. Okay? So they've got this problem, and they bring Paul before the council. He's got to find out what's going on. How can he apply the law? How can he keep things going until he finds out? So he takes them to the council, and that's where we are as we go into chapter 23. And Paul's about to say something. What he said was that I have lived in a clear conscience all my life, and the high priest says, strike him. And Paul talks back to him after they struck him. Finds out he's the high priest. He didn't know it. Most of the time this guy's been high priest. Paul's been in the Gentile world. So that ended that conversation. We don't know what he was going to say because that incident ended it. And it stops there. And that was down through verse 5. So Paul's before this council. And there are... He perceives that there are Sadducees and there are Pharisees there. Now, what's the difference in them? There are two sects of the Jews, yes.
A Pharisee is one who does believe in God but also will teach the law, whereas a Sadducee doesn't believe in the spiritual aspect but will also teach the law.
Does he believe in God?
No, the Sadducees don't.
He does believe in God, but he doesn't believe in a God. He doesn't believe in a resurrection. He doesn't believe that there's anything after life. So God may, there's a being out there. He's going to do a little bit. But since there's no life after death, let's make the most out of this life. The Sadducees are haughty. Their beliefs never really caught traction with most of the people because they liked hanging around the rich people. They liked being a rich people. And we are going to politically go with the Romans and make the best of life because this life is all there is. Okay? So what he sees is he's getting attacked by these, and what is primary in military? Divide and conquer. So what does he do? This is going to do this again. Okay, so when he talks about the resurrection, I think it's brilliant, because what that does is that forces the Pharisees to take a stand. Where are they going to stand? Because when he says it's because of the resurrection, and it is, whose resurrection? The hope of the resurrection, but we have the hope of the resurrection because God raised Jesus from the dead. What he does is true, okay? But he makes them take a side, and that divides them. In fact, the Sadducees before, you remember from back in chapter 4, they're the ones that got irritated with initial teaching because they were talking about resurrection from the dead. Yes?
So not only do they have to take a side, but they have to side with Paul.
They have to what?
Side with Paul.
Absolutely. That doesn't mean that all of them knew what all was going on, because they're part of the council, right? So they come in here, and this guy says, I believe what you believe. You say, well, I believe that. What strikes me about this is, as we read through it, they get divided, and they get agitated, and they don't just argue about it. They start getting violent. So they're passionate. We don't have that much maybe today. Yes?
Some people have this idea that you're not supposed to bring up controversial topics, but this was the most controversial topic to his audience. Of course, do you see where I'm going with that?
Go for it.
He's not shying away from the controversy.
He's got to meet that head on, doesn't he? Why is it so controversial?
Well, it's dividing these two.
Why is it controversial to people, though? Was that a hand?
Yeah, because the entire Sadducees' belief is that if there is no resurrection, we can do whatever we want right now.
So it changes everything.
It forces them to have to be held accountable to something.
You know, ex-atheists will admit, I was an atheist because I didn't want to answer to anyone. That's their thinking. The Sadducees, if I don't have life after death, this life is all there is, what holds me back from making the most of it? From doing what I want? Okay? So it changes everything if we know we're going to answer to someone. And that, by the way, is one element that's missing in our youth today when we see things become more violent and worse. We've taken that away from them by teaching them there's no God. I shoot someone, I shoot myself, I got away with it. No, you're going to your Maker. Changes everything in their mind if they understand it, if they believe that. So, their hostility toward him this is why it changes everything. If this is all there is, there's really no meaning in life. And I have read from multiple people who come to a knowledge of truth of the gospel, who grew up being atheist, that said, I tried suicide because life was hopeless. If this is all there is, that's the way they see it. If this is all there is. And I think that's what he's saying here. Well, if we're the highest form of life, and what man does to man, that's pretty bad. So, the difference in his belief make him... so the Pharisees have to argue sharply for it, because this is what everything's based on. Is there going to be more? And so this house divided became so violent that it was possible for Paul to be torn to pieces. And that's kind of hard for us to fathom today. You know, they're going to beat him up when they're mad at each other. And they have to wade in, they got to get him again. So we've got some really passionate things going on with those. But it ended this where they were all going to gang up on him. All right? This was a stacked deck, shall we say. What this guy do? Everybody's going to say the same thing because we're all part of this council. We're all Jews. We're buddies. He ended that. He has to have the right at some point to defend himself and to actually answer the accusations. And this is a stacked deck. And what he does is, I think he ends that there before that really gets a hold. But now, think about where he is. They bring him back into the barracks. He's not making any headway with anything. In verse 11, the Lord stands by him and says, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, you must also testify of me in Rome." It would have been easy to be discouraged, because if you look at the letter he wrote on his last journey there, he had talked about he wanted to come to them. Apparently they hadn't had any apostles come. He wanted to impart a spiritual gift to them. He talks about it there, and eager to preach the gospel to you. And in the same letter, he expresses that he has for many years wanted to. And he had said, "I'm hoping to come to you shortly." He plans to go to Jerusalem, then I'll journey to Rome, and now he's in bonds. Now he doesn't have control of his own destiny. Easy to be discouraged. Jesus stands by him and says, "Look, you're going to be able to do this. Take courage. I've got you." Okay? Questions or comments on any of this? Yes?
When he says take courage here, it's a really good model for us of how we're supposed to encourage each other. The Lord didn't just say, "Paul, you're going to do all this stuff," and then just disappear for a few years and show back up because Paul getting Rome and just skip all the stuff in the middle. He was there throughout. And when times were tough, like right here, if I had just been almost torn to pieces, I'd probably be a little shaky. Even if I was committed, I still have feelings of fear or this or that. And the Lord stops and says, "Take courage." So when we encourage each other, it's important to remember we don't just say, "Hey, it's great seeing you. I'll see you next Sunday," but to all the times in between. And not only that, but the Lord knew where Paul had been before in Jerusalem. He knows where he's going. Do we know the same about each other? Do we know where we are in our spiritual journey? Do we actually share that or ask about that? So when we take the time to encourage each other, edify one another, like we always say, are we actually doing that with words?
Interesting that we look at passages like Hebrews 10:25 about coming together, but we often don't talk about what's around it, that is actually the purpose. How is it that we tune into each other, and how is it that we encourage one another? This isn't the first time through all that Paul's going through, that God has given him a vision to say, "I'm with you, you're okay. Stay here, I've got lots of people in this city." We've seen that, right? Anything else? I didn't know if your hand was up. Okay. The Romans got him. They've got him surrounded. How do we get him? Well, we just seen the passion was so high, they about tore him apart in the council. Now there's some Jews that get together and say, "We're not going to eat or drink until we kill him." So that indication is we're going to do it quick. What's the plan to do it? How are they going to get their hands on him? They're going to what?
Demand that they give him up.
No, they're not going to fight the Romans head on. Jonathan?
They're going to try to trick the Romans into saying, "We just want to ask him some more questions."
And then,
the Romans will, be okay.
then we'll ambush him.
Well, yeah, but they're going to try to trick him to get him out of the stronghold, and then once he's out of that, they're going to take advantage of it.
Okay. How bad do they want this? You're going against the Romans. This is basically a suicide mission. All right? You kill someone in our custody, if you don't die by the sword getting to him, they're going to kill you after. But we want him this bad. So, they're going to ambush him, and they tell the chief priest, they tell the council, you ask for him, and when he comes down, we'll get him before he gets near you. That's what you call plausible deniability. You won't be found guilty of anything with this because we did have questions for him. You don't know anything about it. So they're willing to do it because it's not a suicide mission for them. But Paul's sister's son hears of it. He goes and tells Paul. And he sends him to the powers that be, and he says, you go tell him what you told me. They took him to the tribune. The tribune takes him aside and says, what you got to tell me, this is what they're going to do. This is the plot. Don't tell anybody this. So now there's a strategic thing that has to happen. Either I got to meet these people head on and have a bloodbath, which I really don't want to do. Really what I want to do is get this prisoner safe. So, they're expecting to ask for him, but if I send him with a bunch of soldiers at night, they won't see that coming. We'll get him out of here, and he'll be protected. He's a Roman citizen now, okay? This guy's head's on the chopping block if he doesn't protect him. Understand that, because he's a Roman citizen. If he was just a Jew, it wouldn't be such a big thing. But, so, he tells you, let me see. He calls two of the centurions. Centurions sent to 100, right? So two of them, he's got 200 soldiers there. He gets 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. And he says they're going to take him between Jerusalem and Caesarea, where Paul had just left. And they're going to leave at 9 p.m. and go into the night when nobody's watching and nobody's ready. And you're going to give amounts to these people. Some of them are going to be foot soldiers. The spearmen aren't going to be that, right? There's going to be foot soldiers with them, so there's plenty around him. And there's going to be those that can keep people away from him. And then he's going to be on horse with enough horsemen so that when they get far enough away from the city, the foot soldiers can come back and they can keep going. But by giving him a mount, they can keep moving. One of the primary things in a dangerous situation they teach you is move off the X. If you stay stable, you're much more likely to get it. They can find you, they can do whatever. Keep him moving. Okay? So that's what he sets up. So he's got some 470 armed men at a surprise hour. Interesting part of this, by the way. I don't know, what's the King James call the spearmen there?
Spearmen.
Okay. The word used there is a little ambiguous in that it's only found 3 times in literature here in the 7th century and the 10th century. The word literally means those who take something in their right hand. So it was either a spear or a sling or something. It was something that could fight at a distance. But he protected him as well as he could. He's going to send him to Felix, the governor. Did you find anything interesting about the letter he writes to him? Claudius Lysias, this is where we find the guy's name for the first time, to His Excellency Governor Felix. He's going up the food chain now. This man was seized by the Jews, and I was about to be killed by them, and I came upon him with soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. Is that the way it happened? When did he find he was a Roman citizen? When he had him stretched out, ready to beat him. He's covering his back. But mostly the letter's factual. Other than that, he's covering his back, right? He's in trouble if he finds out he bound him. So he says, I knew he was, I got this, so don't mention anything about tying him up, don't mention anything about I want to beat him. But I can't find out what's going on. There was a plot against him, so I'm sending him to you so that he's safe and so that you can better inquire of what's happening. So now you've got jurisdiction things happening. Who owns him? Who does he have to answer to? It's not as simple as saying, well, the next guy up the food chain is the answer. Whose jurisdiction is it in? If you commit a crime, if I commit a crime in this town, is it under this town? Or if I'm accused of a crime, maybe I should put it that way. Is it in this town? Is this where I live? Roman law was different, okay? And that's really what follows this. So they take Paul and they bring him, and somehow I've got to get a better system to flip these. This.
Exactly what's going on though with the Jewish people. He understands that it's not a Roman law that Paul had broken. He has done nothing that's deserving of death. This is a inner squabble amongst the Jews regarding the matter of their law. And he says as a Roman citizen, he's not worthy of death, and I'm here to protect him. He's here to protect the Roman citizen.
So he's protecting, you're right, he's protecting a Roman citizen. He's got to keep them from going into a riot, right? Or shedding blood, yes.
A couple of things tells me a little bit that the Roman government thought that one of their citizens' lives is important enough to use this number of soldiers to protect him. And then on the other hand, it kind of makes me think, why couldn't that have taken place with the Lord to protect him and let him have a fair trial, let him, and this is what they're doing, but it would show that the Lord's trial is not fair.
It was a kangaroo court through it. And even, well, he came to die, is the short answer. He didn't even defend himself. This is a different situation, but you're right. So, does it make you appreciate what it meant to be a Roman citizen? When we talk back there, and he says, I'm a Roman citizen, and it scared him because they tied him up, and the guy says, well, I paid a big price for this. He says, I was born for... Kind of helps you understand and appreciate what it meant.
And it also makes me think that if in Rome, their citizens would have thought of their country as this great country that had these kinds of rights that they protect their own, much like we do today in America, and yet Rome failed, so it makes me also stay humble and realize that the kingdom of the Lord is the most important.
That's the only one that's going to last. Right. Notice at the end of the letter, too, that he said, I orders his accusers to state before you what they have against him. So, get away from those that are plot. Get away from their stronger position here, where people plot against him. You go accuse him. This is that right, by the way, that we have to answer our accusers. They had that right. He, as a citizen, had that right, and that's what he's giving him here. So they bring him. This is going to be his journey in captivity. Through the rest of the book, there's going to be this map. What we're seeing down in the lower right is what we see tonight. It take him about 30 miles that way. It was about 70. Let me get this right. When they take him to Antipatris, or whatever that name is, it was about 30 miles from Jerusalem. It was far enough away that they were less vulnerable, and they were out of the mountainous terrain, so that the foot soldiers were able to turn back, and the rest of them took him the rest of the way, which was about 35 more miles to Caesarea. And he had just left there, remember. He was with Philip, the evangelist. This is where Agabus come and said, you're going to have problems when you go to Jerusalem. That's where they take him back to, and they deliver him to the governor. So when we're talking about where, who, what, when he reads the letter in verse 34, he wants to know what province he's from, because he'd been arrested in Jerusalem. Cilicia was under the governor of Syria, but which was under the jurisdiction of Felix. But as a native of Cilicia, if it had been one of insurrection, which Mike, that's what you were answering. Part of what they were saying was, he's preaching Jesus, he's trying to overthrow, he's not paying attention to Caesar, right? If it would have been one of insurrection, which hasn't been answered to him yet, then it would have been to the governor of Syria. Right now, Felix is just trying to understand what's going on. And so he tells him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. He's still under guard, he's still a prisoner, but he has some rights. This was built by Herod the Great as headquarters in Judea. So when we read this, Luke writes it, and he's telling about characters. If we were reading something from 30 or 40 years ago, the young people here would say, well, I've heard of this person. Most of us would remember the people who was the president 30 years ago, that kind of thing. So he's given names that meant something to them. You look at characters like this Felix, let's try to understand them. Felix had been a slave, and he had been a freedman under Emperor Claudius's mother's house. And he had a brother named Pallas, P-A-L-L-A-S. They were both freed together. And Pallas actually made good, became one of Claudius's ministers, and gets Felix appointed here. So there's politics going on. How good of a ruler is a slave going to be? His perspective of the world, his preparation for it. How good is he going? Johnson's saying, not real good. How'd that work out? Not real good. So Tacitus was a Roman historian, often cited because he was pretty accurate on a lot of things, was very critical of Felix. And what he said was, with all the cruelty and lust he exercised the power of a king in the spirit of a slave. So, he thought his brother had his back. I can do whatever I want. That's basically what Tacitus is saying. Another Roman historian, Suetonius, wrote that Felix had 3 wives. Drusilla, the princess of Maranatha, another Drusilla, the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, and a third wife that he doesn't name, which just opened all kind of things to me to say I got 2 wives named Drusilla. My brother named Darrell, my other brother named Darrell. I thought, man, they could have some interesting conversations in this house. So the man is not a moral man, okay? He is not, he had ruled, basically Felix ruled until AD 60, about 8 years. When Nero recalled him in 63, his brother was executed, and he lost his position as a noteworthy person. So you're here, you're with them. I've told your accusers to come so that you can answer them. There's the situation. So after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with the elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. Tertullus is an orator. We would call him, the British would call it a barrister, we call it a lawyer, his attorney. He is the smooth talker. He is going to convince the judge how bad this guy is. That's what his job is. He's to help prosecute him. So when he gets there, first thing he does is flatter. He accuses him, he flatters the judge. Since through you we enjoy much peace, and by your foresight, he gives it to him personally. Not just, we're so happy to live under Rome. We're so happy the Romans have conquered us. You have really helped us. He's buttering him up here. Understand the peace that he's talking about isn't a concept of peace that we tend to have today. Peace that we have today is often two people meet and we negotiate. I'll give a little, you give a little. We'll find somewhere in the middle and we won't fight. Peace, as understood by them, was after I crush you and you can't fight back, there'll be no fighting. And that was peace in the Roman world. Okay? But he's spinning everything as positive coming from the Romans. And reforms being made in this nation. He does all this to butter him up, and then he starts talking about this guy. He found this man a plague. He stirs up riots. So even if you're saying, Mike, he didn't break the Roman law, if he's stirring up riots, he's a problem to Rome, right? He's just a troublemaker. He's a ringleader of the Nazarenes. Because Jesus was raised in Nazareth, people called him Nazarene, and they would call the followers Nazarenes. Now, it was a crime in Rome to start a religion. If you were an idolater, you had a bouquet of gods to choose from. What do you want to do? But starting a religion can often cause a problem in society. We've seen this. Okay? Government doesn't have control of it. It's nothing approved. So it was against the law to start a religion, and it seems like he was probably trying to accuse Paul of starting something here. So now we're trying to get him across that line where the Romans should be offended, not just the Jews. That's what it looks like. And then he talks about him profaning the temple. Now, attempting to profane the temple, which is kind of interesting because when they first grabbed him, they said it was because he profaned the temple. Remember, they drug him out, they shut the door. Good thing we stopped this. He would have done it. Now they're saying, before they said he profaned the temple, now they're saying he attempted to. Why? Because he was talking about violating something even the Romans respected. The Romans didn't violate the temple, the Jewish part of the temple. So he's trying to get it in a place where the Romans will be offended by him also. Questions or comments on this? So we seized him to examine him. And you'll find what we say is true. Now, if you're reading the New King James or the King James, Textus Receptus, it adds the accusation that Lysias had violently taken him away. We would have handled the matter. But this guy come and violently take... So, he didn't handle it right. But we know you will. And the Jews all give their endorsements to all these charges. In fact, so in short, what he does is he accuses Paul of breaking both Roman law and Jewish law that even the Romans tended to honor. There's the case. Prosecution rests. Questions or comments on any of this? Besides the fact they don't care about truth, right? If they cared about truth, they would have reasoned with him and tried to find truth instead of behave like this. We don't see people like that act like that today, do we? Yes.
His argumentation is clearly one-sided, and he makes the accusation, but he's trying to get him on his side, and that's just the way it is. There's no balance in what he's saying.
They wouldn't have paid him if he would have given the other guy's side too, right? Questions or comments? Any others? All right, so now they affirmed everything he said, and the governor lets Paul speak now. So he allows him to answer the accusations. Now, what a judge does. Notice that his opening remarks didn't flatter. What he does is says, I have confidence in you in making his defense, because you have experience in dealing with the Jewish nation. This isn't saying, oh, you're such a wise judge. I believe what he's saying here, and you can argue with this, but I think what he's saying here is because you've dealt with our nation, you understand enough about our religion that you'll be able to make a judgment on this. Any place you live like that, they would understand the people as much, especially when they're ruling over them. They allowed the Jews to run a certain amount of what they did. They had to understand this, and that's really what he's telling them there. Thing to note with this too is it hasn't been more than 12 days since Paul came into Jerusalem. So it was even a shorter time from the time they grabbed him in the temple. Anything that's happened is fresh on people's minds. You want witnesses? This isn't from long ago. Okay, this just happened. It's easy to investigate because there's a lot of people there that still be there. It's just the last few days. All right? And so he asserts that I wasn't there to stir up trouble, either in the temple or the synagogues or the city. I didn't do anything to cause a riot. Nor could they prove the accusations of the troublemaking. There's a big difference between accusing and proving. That's really what a court of law is it not? You get accused of a lot. What can you prove? Okay? So, I know it's kind of interesting to me that he doesn't say, you shouldn't listen to that scallywag. He just answers the accusations to himself. He keeps it to what the matter at hand. So then in verse 14, he's going to answer this thing about being a ringleader of a sect. I confess to you that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets. All right? So he affirms the worship of the same God as what they had, what their ancestors had. What he is saying there is, because it is the same God, it is a legal religion. We haven't started anything new, which was really what the accusation was. This was the logical outcome. This is what all the Old Testament, this is what the law and the prophets pointed to. All I'm doing is taking the conclusion of it and understanding it and following that. I haven't started anything new. In fact, he didn't start anything. All right? In fact, it's the same hope that these Jews had in the resurrection from the dead. If you're sitting there and you're a Pharisee, how do you handle some of these things? He's saying things that you believe, and then there's parts of it you really don't want to embrace if you're a Pharisee, because about Jesus. He makes it clear that Christianity is not a religion contrary to the Old Testament, and that's the crux of him causing trouble. He's trying to overthrow our religion. Can we see that in their arguments? He's talking about Moses. He's talking about the law. He's talking about everything we hold. He's talking about our God. And he's causing trouble. What he's pointing out is, no, that's not doing it. That's what he's trying to make clear to them. And he affirmed his diligence in practicing this religion and stating his and he's trying to maintain a good conscience. He said he went to Jerusalem in verse 17 to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. The alms, basically, remember he had gone around through the Gentile world, all their collections, he had taken the gift to Jerusalem, and he come and what did he do? He did Jewish things there. He didn't do anything that would cause a problem, anything that should have offended them. They were offended by him personally, not by his actions. That's really what it comes down to. So he didn't profane the temple. He was ceremonially pure in the temple. He hadn't taken anybody in that violated it. He hadn't done, he said, you know, have them come testify if that's what I did. And those that have accused me of that aren't here to testify. And if they're not here to testify, I can't be convicted of it. That's essentially his argument there. So these Jews had been witnesses of Paul's appearance to the Sanhedrin or the council. And so he turns to them. And the question is, was I convicted of anything? I wasn't convicted of anything. So he has been taken a long way from home. He is still on trial for what? That is really the question. The only thing they could have really accused him was whenever he says, with respect to the resurrection of the dead, I'm on trial for you this day. That did lead to a riot. Although I don't think he meant to cause a riot. So, that is his defense. And it's late enough we need to stop. We'll plan to pick up there. We've heard the accusations, we've heard the defense. Any questions on anything we've covered today? Too warm for people to be in the mood to talk? Or okay, I thank you for your attention. And we'll go back to our song later. Or